Welcome everybody to this webinar. It's part of the York New Music Weekend. My name is Martin Suckling. I am a composer and violinist, and I'm joined by Catherine Laws, a pianist, Min Young Im, a filmmaker, Carmen Troncoso, a clarinetist, a recorder player. Sorry, changing your instrument there. And Richard Cairns, an audiovisual interactive artist and plier of many trades. And we're all here because we have been working in various ways on creating performances which are particularly sort of pandemic suited because they're designed to be consumed via the internet, via your computer in general. But they did all come out of slightly different situations. So one of these one of these artifacts was conceived and more or less completed before the pandemic started. One of them was meant to be experienced in person, but because of the pandemic, the whole concept had to be rethought to make it in a way that people could experience. And one of them was in a sense a result of the pandemic. It probably wouldn't have happened if we weren't confronted by this particular situation. So there are different starting points for each of them, but there's also a number of parallels for each of them. All of them, to my mind, can convey a certain sort of sense of isolation, of loneliness, and yet each of them depended on being a quite close collaboration between a number of creative artists for them to even exist. They're all preoccupied with the natural world in certain ways, and they're all each of them in a sense kind of a love letter to each of our instruments in a strange kind of way. Maybe love letter is a bit of a cheesy way of putting it, but it's certainly each of these pieces is really closely entwined with certainly mine, Catherine, and Carmen's personal relationship with this instrument, these instruments that we've sort of spent our whole life with and are in a strange kind of way part of us as a person. So they're very different. One is a film, one is a game, and one is a sort of a slight choose your own adventure type thing, but they've all got things in common. So what I propose to do for the next 45 minutes to an hour is that we'll go through each of these pieces in turn, and I'll ask the creators here a question or two, and other people on the panel may sort of chip in with some of these ideas. We've got short clips to play of each of them. So if you've not had an opportunity to go to the Watch Anytime part of the York New Music Weekend website, you can get a sense of what each of them is about. So we'll go through each of those and see where the conversation takes us. And once we've done that, if you're an attendee, by all means, please type questions into the chat. You'll see there's a Q&A button that you can push down the bottom. Type your question in there, and we will we'll see what we can do to answer it. So. Let's get started then with Ceci on piano first of all, and I wonder whether just before I play the clip, Catherine, could you sort of introduce us to this piece and what is it and how have you, because it's not the original, as it were, version of this piece, is it?
That's right. So, I mean, I suppose this one is different from the other projects in a very obvious way, in that the musical composition existed prior to any of my work with it or the attempt to make a film. The piece was composed by Annie Lockwood in 2002, and it was written for another pianist, for Jennifer Heimer, who's an American pianist. I came across it and really, really wanted to play it. The piece, as you'll know if you've seen it already, and you'll discover in a minute, it's for a pianist, but also there's a recorded text that we hear played back through the piano. And that text is of a pianist. We don't necessarily know it's the pianist who's playing, but I suppose by implication we think it might be, but a pianist speaking about her playing life, about her relationship to the piano in all sorts of different kinds of ways. So I really loved this piece and I wanted to play it. I contacted Ania, who said, yeah, great. And who sent me everything I needed, because there's a bit of a kit that you need to play this piece. But she also sent me Jennifer's recording of her text. And she had assumed that I would play the piano, but would use Jennifer's text to play alongside. To me, that felt a little bit odd, because Jennifer's text is really quite personal. And on the one hand, we might not even know whether this really is the pianist talking or not, because the pianist who's playing is silent, but we hear a voice. On the other hand, it felt to me very odd to be part of a performance with a pianist talking about a relationship to an instrument and it to be another pianist. So I said to Ania, can I make my own text? Luckily, she said yes, and she mastered it. And so then I went ahead and I performed and recorded it and had a great time with it. But I also wanted to make a film, so we'll talk about that a bit later. But anyway, so the piece existed already. And the title, Ceci n'est pas un piano, it references René Magritte's very famous series of paintings from, I think, mostly the 1920s, a series called The Treachery of Images. Perhaps the most famous one is an absolutely beautifully rendered, realistic painting of a pipe. And underneath it says, Ceci n'est pas un pipe. This is not a pipe. So on the one hand, we have as close as you can get in a painting to a picture of a pipe. And then we have the statement, but this isn't a pipe. And there's lots of those paintings. I can't remember how many, but there's an apple and, they're fairly well known. So obviously, Ania picked up on that idea of, we have this thing, we have a piano, but at the same time, it's saying this is not a piano. And of course, that prompts lots of thinking about what a piano is, what it sounds like, what it looks like. To me, the other side of this was, it also opens up the question of what's a pianist? And so I was interested from that point of view. So anyway, that's the background to the piece as a composition. That's probably enough to say now, isn't it, Martin? If we
yeah,
clip
perfect. Well, this is a little sort of 90-second, 2-minute clip of Ceci, which has been specially made by Min Young for today. Here we go.
These hands of mine, I sometimes wonder where they come from, how they got this way. I'm not sure they're pianist's hands, really. I watch my baby boy carefully trying to pick things up, developing his fine pincer movements. And what I do love is getting right inside the instrument, head under the lid of a big resonant grand, with the overtones bouncing around, the blooming, buzzing confusion where you can't tell what's in your head and what's outside it. Sometimes it starts to feel like I'm burrowing into the instrument's own space, not just knocking on it, asking to be let in. I'm supposed to have mastered, definitely mastered, this beast of an instrument, but my body has been trained, modified, disciplined by it too.
Great. It's really beautiful. It's really haunting. Now, the first thing that strikes me when I see this is that it's very obviously not a film of a live performance. That it's much more than that. And Catherine, you've said that you really wanted to make a film version of the piece, which isn't just a recording of something that you might have in person. And I think that's something that's shared by all the participants here and the things that we produced. What did you feel that the film medium offered to you for presenting this piece? Because yours was the one done before the pandemic, so this was not a matter of necessity. This was a real sort of artistic choice. So what was it that was it something extra? Was it something beyond? What was it that made you want to create this film?
To some extent, it's just an extension of what I try to do a lot anyway, in that a lot of my own performance practice is somewhat theatrical. So it can be very explicitly theatrical, where I'm doing musical things, but I'm also doing other things around the stage. Other times there are pieces which have a focus on physical action, but at the piano, or other elements drawn in, which kind of take it beyond the standard concert piece. One thing with this piece is that it is supposed to be shown in live performance with a series of stills projected. And those stills are Anya Lockwood's own photos from a series of what she called piano transplants that she's been making on and off since the 1970s, where she placed pianos in various places around the natural world. So you get a piano in a forest, you get a piano on a beach, kind of sinking into the shingle, and then invite, people are kind of go and play them or whatever. And she took photos of them in different kind of states of absorption into the environment, I suppose. So they're kind of events, but then there are also still photographs which are kind of a residue of the event. And so part of this piece, if it's performed live, is the showing of this, of situating the performer at the piano, as well as hearing the text, actually seeing these images. So there's already that idea that there's something to do with the piano in the environment in this piece. So we could have made a film that was really a film of live performance, but using some of those stills. That seemed to be, it seems to me, as soon as you move into the possibility of film, there's all sorts of other things you can do, and it's a shame not to use that. It's also an opportunity to think about your relationship to the material, and to think about, how you want to convey certain things. For me, it became a way of amplifying some of what's said in the text about the individual player's relationship to the instrument. So it became, not simply that we have a text that kind of evokes questions about playing the piano, the body at the piano, the body over time, that kind of thing. And then that juxtaposed with images of pianos in fields or on beaches, but rather that those two things perhaps could intermingle a little bit more thematically, and it seemed to offer that that kind of opportunity. And Min Young and I had made a number of what kind of called piano films, I suppose, which was each time taking a piece that I'd performed live a number of times in lots of places in different ways, but thinking, okay, let's make a film version of this, not simply film live performance, even if there might be sections where you do see me playing the piano, that actually that was part of it, but not the whole thing. So for me, it offered that kind of opportunity. As you say, nothing to do with the pandemic, really. Luckily, we had finished filming just before, I think it was February, late February, we were doing it. So the editing and kind of continued work was during pandemic, but more about that sense that, okay, we want to kind of find different ways of presenting this work, different ways of showing it to different kinds of audiences, I suppose. And it seems a shame that, so much new music only gets played once or twice. So it's hard to get people to book you to do lots of new music. And that there's so much that goes into all of this. So it's another kind of way of thinking about how to make different versions of things and disseminate differently.
Thanks, Catherine. Yeah, I mean, and it's sort of related to that. One of the things that I found watching this film was that it's sort of it kind of gave me an insight into the sort of the physicality of the instrument and of the making of the noises. Obviously, there's a sort of there's a kind of intimacy and closeness that you can get with Min Young's camera angles when you're playing the fazioli, so you get this that like these this playing inside the piano has a sort of a precision and a closeness that you might not be able to get sitting at the back of an auditorium, which is really interesting to be right there on the stage. But also, just all these scenes of you pushing this upright around the countryside, and you've got to me it created the real sort of heaviness of the instrument. I found really really tangible and sort of really really interesting, because so often with performance, one of the things we're sort of taught to do is to try and transcend these aspects, and to be like that the instrument is weightless and the sound just emerges, and even these bits where you're not actually making a sound, but we just really feel what a beast this thing is, and the struggle and the effort. Was that something that you and Min Young wanted to get across in this film?
For me, definitely. It'll be interesting to hear what Min Young says about that, but that's been something of a preoccupation of mine for a while, that in some ways the piano has a kind of weight of tradition behind it, and that's amazing in some ways. It's also something that I think all pianists feel to some extent, but also just that physically, as you say, it is a beast of an instrument. It's hugely expensive as well. It's really big, really heavy. I spend a lot of time in my life moving pianos around. Every time you want to play one, you have to drag it around the space. I also, so not all pianists spend a lot of time dragging pianos around, but I actually do for various reasons. But also, as you say, a lot of research that's about the body and the musical instrument is about the idea of incorporation, which is like feeling at one with the instrument, incorporating it into your body. Things, as you say, sounds kind of flowing out of the instrument, all of that kind of thing, which is absolutely really important to some extent to instrumental training. But for pianists, there's an element of that, but it's a very different thing. I mean, Carmen mostly plays quite small instruments. I know some of the recorders are quite big, but it's much easier to imagine how an instrument that you can hold in your hands and breathe through might start to feel part of your body than something that is that you really play on. I mean, pianists certainly start to feel that they are somehow touching and bringing sound to life through their fingers, but nevertheless, there's this huge thing that you are working with, controlling, manipulating, and I think it's not the same. And I'm quite interested in the differences in those kind of sensitive relationships to these physical bodies. But I'm not really sure how Min Young thought of that when I said to her, I want to push a piano around somewhere outside. I didn't say exactly where, I don't think, but I said, this is what I'm thinking about. What do you think?
I think I laughed when you first told me you wanna push the piano on the street outside of your house. But then you made it. We were struggling to get the right type of piano at the beginning, but she got the right one, and she did push. But first maybe an hour it was easier than the rest, because she got really exhausted, and it was really difficult because the ground is not even, and but I wanted to exaggerate how heavy and difficult, and the physically really difficult challenge that is for her. I mean, probably might be a metaphor for you, like playing a piano in front of the audience is like that much difficult thing, like as pushing the heavy piano in public. I thought, and that's why I use like a extremely slow motion in the piano in the video, because I thought it would be emphasizing how difficult challenge it is to live as a pianist, I guess. Yeah.
Well, Min Young, maybe you could tell us some more about this process of collaboration with Catherine, because she said, this is the fifth of these piano films that you've made together. And my image of a director when working with music is that they make the film and then come to the composer or the sound artist and say, right, I want music like this to go with this. But of course, you're working in the opposite direction with these pieces, and with this one in particular, it struck me that it's very, very personal to Catherine. The text is overtly autobiographical, and so you're working with your friend and that aspect of things. So how did you was it Catherine's idea, this particular situation? How did you because there's also sort of a narrative to the process that we see. What led you to these particular choices?
Uh, it was generally her idea to. So we had 2 days of filming. So we filmed in the Reimer in the university. So that was a recording version of the piece, I guess. And then we had one more day near her house pushing the piano. So that was more like a performance side of the video, I guess. So I like to, it's a really good opportunity for me to experiment the sound and the visual for me as well, because usually they just want me to film the performance, they don't want me to do more stuff, but she actually really likes for me to do more stuff in editing and things. So like, I can play with the speed of the music when I'm editing and stuff. So it's always really a pleasure to work with her. It's unusual. Yeah, but yeah, generally ideas from her, like, yeah.
But I think that it struck me there's some really, maybe the sort of okay, I want to push a piano through a field of mud and end up at a pond aspect, but things like this lovely edit which we saw in that clip there, where the rolling of the ball on the strings is mirrored by the reversing and forward motion of that angled shot, which sort of really emphasizes sort of Catherine said. Did she direct you to that, or did this come from you, from the edit?
So that sort of details were my idea, I think, and that happens when I'm editing, when I'm playing with the footage. What if I speed up this part? What if I slow down this part? And then we check maybe several times whether it looks okay, or I don't want to ruin the original piece because it's not really like my video, is it? So it's a collaboration of hers and composers, so I shouldn't ruin the originality, but I can I can put a little bit of my creativity in there, I guess. So I play with the footage a lot when I'm editing, I think. Yeah.
I was going to say it's interesting because to me, in some respects, I kind of think, okay, I'm going and I'm saying, right, this is the piece we're doing, and this is kind of what I want to do with it. And that sounds very like, okay, so now just do this for me. And on one level it is, but actually all of those things that Min-young brings to it are actually what really makes it, those which would never occur to me, all of those details about how these things are really going to interrelate, the detail of where and exactly how to film, and then how she's going to edit and make that relationship. And she has, I think, a really wonderful kind of appreciation of those kind of musical things and how that might translate in some way into filmic things. I think some of the decisions about exact location were yours, if I remember rightly. Like we spent some time wandering around, like whereabouts around here are we going to use which field. I have a feeling that the use of the pond was entirely you, and I was quite skeptical for quite a while about the pond, partly because I just thought we might lose the piano in it.
The direction was really ambiguous. Like, you don't want to push the piano entirely into the pond, but you don't want to save the piano from the pond. So it was like I had to, But yeah, the pond was really lovely. I really liked the ending. We didn't show it in this session, but please have a look. It's on the webpage, the event page. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, well, that's great, and I think it's really clear that this sort of the trust between the different collaborative partners is absolutely crucial to making these things work. Well, should we move on now to Between Air, Clay, and Woods of Certain Flutes with Carmen and Richard, which sort of multiplies the number of collaborators in several, because you have what, sort of 15 composers you had working with you on this piece. And maybe what I'll do is just play this short clip of the forest in Chile where this sort of all comes from, and then perhaps, Carmen, you could tell us a bit about the journey of this sort of collection of pieces, this event which has ended up in this game that it's now become. But here's the forest, which to a certain extent these ideas began. And this is from La Campana National Park in Chile. So, Carmen, what takes us from this arboreal scene to a playable game that's up on the website now?
Well, I think the essential ingredient of this huge project between Air, Clay, and Woods of Certain Flutes is the relationship with my instrument, like Catherine's probably starting point. So when I see the forest now, the trunks for me are different recorder designs from my collection. So one thing that it's different for a recorder player is the variety of instruments that we are used to play. So diversity has been something to play with for me along my career. And so the basic thing comes from my years and years of practice with this very different or subtlety, different instruments that even though they are playing nowadays contemporary music and they are settled into the contemporary musical scene, they always carry the past with them. And that's a thing that it makes my perception of them quite intense, because for me, my instruments are carriers of epochs, aesthetics, styles, anecdotes with instrument makers from the past. So they have a multiplicity that I've been trying to convey through my projects. So after having played with this diversity and like looking at the way of choosing the different instruments, and I started to feel a shift in my perception and trying to project them not only as sheer tools to express myself, but feeling them, perceiving them as individual entities. So, and I started to realize how much we regard as objects many things that surround us, starting from my instruments as a performer, but that extends to nature, for example. So, just started to feel curious about the ways in which things have their own way of expressing themselves. They have agency, they have the power of transforming independent from us. So I think that's how the idea of first assembling an installation came from this idea of trying to create an environment that connects different elements from the instruments and from the materials, for example. So the recorder being a wooden instrument connected to this forest where it originally came from, and also the hands of the makers that in a sort of violent process transform this matter into living instrument, wind instruments, or whatever the instrument you play. And also issues of identity as well, because I've always played this European instrument, and as a Chilean recorder performer, I've always felt a certain foreignness with this repertoire, even though I play that since I was 5 years old. I went to a German conservatory in Chile, so it was always European music, but in different languages, not in Spanish, and everything was foreign, and I was used to that. All the dances weren't Latin American, weren't European, and I don't know why. I've been always very conscious of that. So one part of this project has to do with pre-Columbian instruments, so with clay, with the earth, and I think that has helped me, that has opened up questions to me about how to connect my different identities, because I do feel that I have a European musical identity, but I also feel that I have to connect that with the other one, that it's there when I play the clay recorders. It's completely another relationship with sound. So one thing that came up is that all the sounds that I recorded for the soundtrack aren't sounds that carry any typical recorder tradition. So, and I named them like foliage sounds, they are perennial sounds, they are sounds that are come from the recorder, but are extremely connected to nature, to the origins of air, wind instruments. So, and that's how we started our collaboration with Richard, finding ways to develop an environment to connect things, all these elements.
So then already sort of from the start, when this was conceived as an installation that people would go and experience in person, it was always looking to be able to share an aspect of your performance which isn't usually accessible to people. All these connections between what the instruments mean to you, what they mean historically, what they mean in terms of geography, and so it's you were sort of from the start looking to do something which was beyond a normal concert performance situation. And in the way the installation was originally conceived, would you have performed some of the pieces there, or would they all have been recorded? What was it going to be also an environment in which you performed, or was it all going to be recorded?
Yeah, at the beginning I thought that I was going to play live, and I thought of different creative ways of doing that to give the visitor the possibility of choosing what should I play. So at the beginning I thought of stations, but then it was always more about an exhibition than an installation. So I started to look so many work from artists, and I was especially inspired by artists who collaborate with nature and who don't explain, or they don't need labels. I really wanted to create an experience, so to convey all of these elements that are to do with my perception, and because of lockdown, of course, it wasn't possible. And I thought also that when you go inside a forest, you have a soundtrack that it's there. And actually, I thought of creating environmental sound, different works, that would help creating this audiovisual whole thing. So, and I really wanted and decided not to be there as a performer, because I wanted the instruments and the forest and the hands and the clay and all the elements that are there that has to do with the properties of materials involved. I wanted that to be the protagonist. And so the only human image that you see are the makers working, the hands of the makers. But it's not me there, and I like that, not like having the instruments there, but an independent, appearing, projecting, and showing properties, but without the performer trying to move them.
Sort of taking this whole ego of the performer out of there and allowing us to sort of immerse ourselves in these sounds and these different pieces of music. So in a way, actually, a game which is where you were in a sense forced to move towards is the ideal situation. Now, if I move to Richard at this point, one of the things that I found when I was playing the game was actually how different my listening experience was to when I would normally hear a piece of music, or even hearing a piece of music with film, because it's sort of, I was immediately back as a sort of game playing teenager where I was applying every cue that I could hear in the music to the sort of situation that I was in, and you know, if I moved and made that sound happen, it was creating all sorts of connections that I was drawing between what I was seeing and as I was moving, what I was doing, to what I was hearing, which was quite a different musical experience for me than even hearing music with a film. It was really fascinating. So I wonder if you've got anything you could say on this sort of area of how because interactivity and user experience are some of your main focuses, and how they enable us to listen differently, and perhaps if you have any thoughts on to where this might go in the future.
I think that it's a really important question. I mean, in the work that I've done in the past, in the installations I've built in the past, I've used audio that's often triggered by sensors within environments that carry little to no instruction as to their kind of function. So they need to be worked out through physical presence, what happens, what's going to happen next. And they've often dealt with the natural world and nature, and kind of retipped the balance between us as people being in control of nature and nature being kind of unpredictable and kind of unknown. And it's that level of uncertainty that seems to be really important in terms of engaging an audience and observing an audience, absorbing an audience, and allowing them to sort of make meaning out of their experience. And that was something that I really wanted to do in the game as well. So I was looking at object sound. It's very localized. If you listen to it with headphones on, in particular, the frequencies change as you move away and move towards objects. And it's a kind of strange and uncertain environment. And I think that, well, my children said it's quite kind of unnerving. You come across these creatures.
Let's pause for a moment and watch the gameplay clip, which I can pretend I meant to put on just now, but I actually forgot to put on a couple of minutes ago. But here it comes. very strange in a really sort of evocative way. And I mean, it may just be because I had this sort of youth of playing computer games, but I found myself much more sort of intrigued and wanting to explore, even though it's not photorealistic. But even more than I might have been in a sort of exhibition space, it sort of really sort of draws you in. It seems to me one of the sort of big advantages of this kind of way of presenting these materials. Oh, you're muted, Richard. Sorry.
You're muted.
It's quite a new exploration, really, in how these sort of ideas and environments can be explored, for me anyway. And I think as soon as I started building this environment, I was sort of plunged back into the world of my childhood, where I spent many hours in forests, and they're kind of very much part of my sort of recurring dreamscape. And so there is this relationship between the sort of uncertainty of those sort of unconscious dream worlds, the screen, the choices that present oneself, that are presented within the game. And so it's quite an organic experience of development, and obviously there's the sort of, how does one operate the software? What is the best way to actually compress the audio file, positioning? All of this pragmatic things are kind of being developed in line with the actual physical virtual space as well. It's for me, as sort of, whilst I've been developing it, it's very much a dialogue between what's happening and what we had in the installation, and what Carmen told me about her experiences of forests, and obviously the content of the instruments and their relationship with, particularly with animal sounds as well, with certain bird sounds, and this whole sort of strange world that's created.
Thank you, Richard. Well, I think we'll move on to my piece just now, and just briefly, so that we've got some time for audience questions. Before we finish things up, I see that there's one there already, which we'll come to in a moment. So, to tell you a little bit about mine, it was called "These Bones, This Flesh, This Skin." This collaboration between me as a composer and Jonathan Morton, the artistic director and violinist from the Scottish Ensemble and Scottish Dance Theatre. So João Castro is the dancer, the choreographer, Joan Clavier, and the filmographer, who is also herself a dancer, Genevieve Reeves. And this is the one that came out of the pandemic, because Scottish Ensemble, it was who initiated it, found themselves in a situation where they weren't able to perform, but still wanted to create things. So Jonathan got in touch with me to ask if I might write something for him to be filmed with dance, and I was very keen that we do something which was actually just like Catherine has said, and Carmen has articulated as well, that went beyond what would happen in a normal performance situation, that would actually really sort of make the most of the way that it was going to have to be consumed. So we came up, we had a great deal of sort of conversations and sort of figuring out what we might want to do together. In fact, we had, I should be able to show you a little clip, a little image of it. We had this big shared document where you can see we sort of put images and made suggestions, and it was a lot to do with, this was at the start of the first lockdown, and we were sort of talking about our our routines and what happened. Of course, everybody making the most of their opportunity to go out for their one bit of exercise a day, and how we were sort of experiencing the natural world and the changes amongst the repetition, and how our sort of experience of time was changing. And this led to this idea that came from Gerard Grise, of different types of time, of a skeleton of time, of a flesh of time, and a skin of time, and interestingly, from the dance side of the perspective, they found this very evocative, because this relates, you can see the image that they put there, relates to how they're thinking of their body. So that's how the sort of the title came about, and we came up with this idea that, well, what if there was a type of dance and a type of music, and in a sense a type of experiencing time that was associated with each of these things, and you as an audience member could sort of choose which one you experience. And originally we had this idea where you might be able to sort of dissolve from one type to another as it was playing. That ended up being a little bit too complex to manage technically, but what we did manage was that there were 3 different films, one bones, one flesh, one skin, and 3 different types of music, and that you could put the music in any of those 3 different combinations. So in a sense, 7 different audio tracks which could be applied to any of the 3 different films, so 21 different things in all. And they were I think partly because Genevieve is a dancer, the way they were filmed was associated with these sort of different types of beings. So I'll just show you some very short clips, the trailers that she did for the different film types, and you should be able to see the different type of visual experience. So Bones went like this. A very short clip. The music for Bones is all, it's kind of the equivalent of the inside the piano stuff that Catherine was doing. Is all noise type sounds from the violin, but slowed down 8 times. So that's where those sort of bass drum type things. It's actually just a on the violin, but very much slowed down. So all the sounds are just coming from the violin. The camera work there, you can see it's quite jerky, quite shaky, because the dancers had this sort of sense of sort of brittleness with that. So that they were the bones, and then the flesh. So you can see it's very, Genevieve wanted to be very, very close to Gerald the dancer there, so you could sort of really sort of almost be like dancing with him and see the attention paid to the sort of quite fluid body movements in that. And you can hear there that the music, that's the sort of the mid-level of the music, recognize again the historical aspects relating to Bach and the sort of the standard production of tone, and then skin, which sort of seemed to have for us this kind of sort of dispassionate, sort of objective nature to it. So all the camera shots are on tripod and static, unlike the other ones, and the music is all on harmonics, and it just takes a sort of series of waves, and this was our, but the journey that's sort of presented in the film is essentially the same one for each of them. And I think one of the things that really interested us was that this was an opportunity to be able to produce something which which in a funny kind of way doesn't actually exist. None of the 21 different possibilities is the identity of the piece. It's something that emerges from considering all those different possibilities together. And of course, that's something that in a sense you do have as a performer. If you give a number of performances of things, then you start to, and even when you're practicing, you start to sort of feel the piece as this thing which sort of exists between all these spaces that you've made. But in a single performance, and for an audience to experience it, that's not possible. And this using the internet as a way of delivering it, and having a website where you could choose how it was put together, sort of allows somebody in their own time to build up that sort of understanding of the different types of things that we were trying to put across. So that was my one. We've got a few minutes left, and we can probably run a few minutes over if the conversation goes. But I see we have a question here, and anybody who wishes to put questions in the Q&A, please do. We have one from a certain Colin Suckling that I predicted might arrive before everybody came in. And he asks, how do you think these very interesting videos might catch on with the music consuming public? Will there be the equivalent of pop music videos and art music publicised and made available? Otherwise, it's very interesting for you guys, but doesn't do very much. Well, I have my own ideas on that, but any of the of the panel, how would you like to respond?
I think I'll be happy to respond. I think that the music consuming public, the art consuming public is vast and international. And I think that there are many venues of potential distribution, and not all of them are necessarily going to hit a kind of mass media level. And I see that all of these pieces are part of wider conversations, and journal articles, like any kind of art public, the audiences are always quite small and specialist, but the reach can go, it can ripple out, if that makes sense.
I agree with that. And I think also one of the things is that, when you're working in new music performance, the audiences are relatively small, and you want to widen that in certain respects. So on the one hand, this is an opportunity to do that, but also the kind of temporality, the time scale of these things is very different in terms of their accessibility. So one of the things this does is, by making these things and making them available in different ways, so that they might be sitting on the internet to be discovered by somebody who happens to get interested in a particular composer or a particular filmmaker or a particular performer. And there's, these things are kind of there somewhere on the web and can be linked those ways. So they might be encountered that way over any kind of period of time, up to years after their making. When in terms of performance, you might seem to have, more people there at one time, but then the likelihood of that actually being replicated many times in the new music world is relatively small. So it's never going to be the same as pop music videos in that respect. But I like the fact that as well as it being a way of rethinking and re-envisaging the pieces, people encounter them in different ways and in different contexts. I suppose also we should say that, increasingly kind of festivals of different kinds, arts festivals, are including these kinds of things, showings of these kinds of things. And also lots of different kinds of artists are working this way, so that people are kind of a bit more aware of it anyway, rather than it just sitting there being in the hope that somebody might find it sometimes. So sometimes, you get showings at festivals of a number of videos like this. So it's an important question, whether it does anything very much, but I'm not sure it's a terribly different question to the one of new music performance. It's just happens in a different way and on a different kind of temporal scale, perhaps, in terms of its discovery and dissemination.
And I think also, I think we need to be aware that, you know, these are these are new types of experience as well that are being offered, and they're sort of relatively, you know, the new music world, even though it's interested in new music, is also sort of part of that slightly conservative world of concert going public that sort of expects things to be done perhaps in particular ways. And the what these things allow are different. I mean, they're different ways of experiencing music, and there may be things which aren't, you know, they're not just music. It's a new type of artistic experience, and that may take some time in a sense to gain traction. But I think, you know, even traditional media are more and more aware that that people are consuming. You know, I don't even have a television aerial in my house. All the television comes in through the internet. Everything is being mediated in this sort of a way, and it's though in a sense it might seem that these are, you know, these are nice little diversions for us to create, but if more and more one's encounters with art of various types is coming through the internet, then to create things which specifically use what the internet, what the visual aspects and the interactive aspects allow, is, I think, a really important one. And I find watching a filmed concert quite these days quite upsetting almost, because I would rather actually go to. It just reminds me what I'm missing. But there is something, you know, like watching Catherine and Minyoung's film, or playing Richard and Carmen's game. It creates a different type of experience, allowed me to immerse myself in the music in a different way, which I found very enriching. And Colin Suckling has a follow-up. Fancy that. In my view as a consumer, I think that this is a huge opportunity to bring new experiences in and with music to more people. Doesn't it make it worth doing something rather than leaving it to passive diffusion? Well, yeah, I suspect we probably all would agree with that, but I also suspect that there's this aspect of a limited amount of energy, and the thing about being a creative artist is you do this thing and you love it, but you then want to go and make the next thing.
But I think he has sorry.
No, go,
but
go,
I
go.
think he really has a point, because we have talked with Richard about that, because exactly the amount of work, the layers of work. I read the word palimpsest in the thing that, and it's one that I used also for one of my projects, and it's definitely a huge creative work that requires that expertise. So I would really like to know platforms or galleries or ways of dealing with. I don't know anything about marketing, for example, or I feel that I'm a creative practitioner, and I spend hours creating, developing sounds and using my instrument. There's a practice that you need to maintain, and I'm good at having ideas and putting people together to work on that in creative ways. But it's a step that I really would like to know how to present the work, where, how to be assisted on that. Who is the people who could help us spreading our work, so that it doesn't only stay on a website, but it's time consuming, and it's an expertise that I don't have, for example, and I would love to work with people who know more. So it's an issue. I think it's a really good point. I don't think that we are going to have the solution, because we need to create.
Well,
yes, I agree. I mean, we have talked a lot about this, about distribution, about how to get it out there, where to get it out. But it does, as Carmen was saying, require an enormous amount of energy and man hours. You know, it's a problem.
It's a problem, yes.
Because the development process, so Carmen making sounds, developing the game, these are slow and very long and laborious kind of enterprises.
Can I ask Martin a bit about that? Because one of the issues is that the structures that exist to support certain forms of work, you know, performance or whatever, are clearly, you know, for the most of these projects are just not there around there. So as you say, it's a lot of work, and it's the work that we're not kind of really trained to do, and that in other environments, whether it's performance or whatever, there's other people you're working with who are kind of doing that for you. Martin, yours is the one that in some way possibly sits a little bit more in that kind of environment, in that exactly because it was initially going to be commissioned as a live event and then became something else, it is part of a you know, it's with Scottish dance and or the Scottish ensemble, and it has that kind of structure around it. But has that made any difference? I mean, I know it's on their website, but has it made any difference to how it's out there in the world?
I don't have the data actually on this. Scottish ensemble do. Certainly, you know, it's an advantage to have been doing it as part of the production of a number of established performing organizations, because they have their ways of distribution and mailing and letting people know about things. So it's gained a certain amount of attention that way, and of course, the more people that you have involved in making it, the sort of the natural distribution networks are wider. And I think in particular when this was done, because it was a specific, like, okay, this is what we are doing during the pandemic at this point, there were people sort of open to that. But in a funny kind of way, one of the things we're looking at now is how we might be able to then sort of reverse engineer it so that it can also be a performed sort of thing. I think the fact is that the structures for distribution and consumption of these things are not yet there, and the advantage of the internet is that anybody can access it, more or less, up to a point, but also that it's so vast that unless you are sort of directed in a particular way, you're not going to know what to access. So people, I think, rely still on their sort of trusted sources as to how to go there. So it's a tricky problem, and yes, perhaps it's an area of research for the next grant proposal. We've got one more question down here from and maybe we'll have that and leave things. I would say that the promotion and marketing of research to a wider audience is not the responsibility of the creator, and never has been until now, where indie content creators need to survive and are being forced to. I'd suggest that promotion of what is effectively research is up to the university, and they need to change their infrastructure to allow that, if that's what they want. What does anybody feel about that? It's the university who should be now taking this and making a big deal of it.
I think I know so many artists spending their, I don't know, whole day to marketing themselves on Instagram, YouTube, Twitter. I think it's a bit, I mean, it's a bit late to say marketing is not the artist's job, because it already is. And when you think about YBA, I think they made a point of the fact that art became marketing, not about the content itself. I don't think it's very separatable. So in that case, what's the solution? I don't know. But one thing I noticed is that the biggest difference between the live performance and the putting your stuff on the internet is that you can't force people to watch in a certain way. they're gonna watch on their mobile phone, or some people will watch on TV, and then they might just leave in even before the video finished, and you can't really control the audience in a traditional way. So I quite like the Martin's project because it's kind of asking people to involve in the process of making the video. So I think that's really good. Try to make people do more, interact with the piece from the point of the process of making the final project, I think. So we need more kind of a new approach to make people involved in art. If we have to try a lot harder, because internet is full of really strong commercial probably more professionally done images already there to compete with them. I think we will need to do more, a lot more harder work. It's a lot harder than before, I think. Yeah.
I think you're right, and I think actually that nicely brings us full circle, because it's sort of acknowledging that you know the platforms on which we've chosen to make these artistic works have different opportunities, but also have different requirements and expectations from the consumers, from the people who be watching it, and that it, to a certain extent, it's our responsibility as artists to give them something to engage with, and we can't expect these these older methods of you're sitting in a room and I've got you now to work, and that you know the marketing and the product are actually part of the same thing, and that actually I think all of us are. I don't think we necessarily think of each of these things that we're making as a single thing in itself, that actually what we're trying to do is create a body of work that has an impact sort of across its span, and people may interact with it and get involved in different ways and in different depths, but that it needs to be out there for this to be possible. Well, thank you very much to our participants, Catherine, Manu, Carmen, and Richard, for sharing your work with us and giving us such fascinating insight. Thank you to those who came to hear us. And for your questions, and the things should stay up online. And if you said, how do we get people to know about them? Well, you please go and tell people, and more people can enjoy it. But for now, thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you, Martin.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Thank you for your
Bye.
work. I really
Bye-bye.
enjoyed watching it.